Here's a thing that happened in Australia in 1984. Somebody spent $250,000 building a giant pig. Not a real one, obviously. A robot one. Life-size. And I should clarify, because this is Australia, that life-size here means the size of a small car. Tusks, hydraulic, a monstrous animatronic boar built to charge across the outback and kill people in a horror film called Razorback. Somewhere in a Sydney workshop, a team of grown adults spent months on the single most ambitious feat of oversized porcine engineering the Southern Hemisphere had ever attempted. The Sydney Opera House of pigs, if you may. And it did not work. It barely moved. You see, the hydraulics failed. The thing that cost more than most entire Australian films cost to make, the centerpiece, the monster, the whole reason the film exists, switched on, twitched, made a noise like a dying fax machine, and broke. Over and over. So, in the finished film, the most expensive object in the production appears for about 4 seconds, because every single time they turned it on, the pig, fittingly, gave up the ghost. So the director did the only thing a sane man could. He hid the pig. He shot around it, smaller puppets, a real pig for the close-ups who, I'm pleased to report, was a consummate professional and never once asked for rewrites. A lot of fog, a lot of red light, and a lot of very fast cutting. And here's the punchline. The film looks incredible. Razorback is one of the best looking Australian films of the decade, and it's beautiful precisely because you almost never see the $250,000 animal they built it around. A masterclass in cinema, accidentally created by a broken robot's refusal to do its one job. Now, here's the question nobody ever stops to ask about that pig. Why was anyone in Australia in 1984 spending $250,000 on a robot boar in the first place? Where does that kind of money come from? Who sits in a meeting, looks at a feral pig and goes, "Yep, that's where the smart money's going this quarter"? The answer is tax. The answer, it turns out, is almost always tax. My name is Matt Dolby. This is Strange Country. So if you're new here, welcome in the quick version. This is a podcast about Australian and New Zealand horror cinema. It's about the films two countries made when they wanted to scare themselves, and what those films accidentally confess about the places that made them. Horror is where a country keeps the stuff it can't say out loud, and we go digging in the back room. And today, the back room is a big one, because today, we're talking about a roughly 20-year window from about 1971 to the late 80s, where Australia made more horror, more action, and more sheer cheerful filth than in any time before or since. Killer pigs, comatose telekinetic murderers, vampires who won a corporation, presumably with an HR department, stuntmen on fire, on purpose, for money. A whole 20 years of it. The period has a name now. It's called Ozploitation, which is a terrible word. And we kind of stuck with it, so let's all just make our peace with that early and move on. There's a famous documentary about this era, and it's called Not Quite Hollywood. It came out in 2008. And if you haven't seen it, you should. It's a riot. Quentin Tarantino's in it, vibrating with joy and telling you these films are the greatest thing he ever committed to celluloid. And he's not entirely wrong. But the documentary treats the whole period like a wild party. All the great stories told fast, one after the other. Look how mad it was. Isn't this mad? Here's another mad one. But the one big question that nobody at that party ever stopped to ask, somewhere around the third drink, is, hang on, who's paying for the bar? Because parties this big don't happen by accident. Somebody, somewhere, made a decision that turned the lights on and opened the tab. And once you find out who and why, this whole era stops being a random explosion of weirdness and turns into something much stranger. And honestly, much more Australian. So that's the promise. By the end of this, you'll understand why a robot pig and a man who kills with his mind and a couple being hunted by the actual bush, all called out of the same 20-year gap. And what that gap says about a country that spent the whole time pretending these films didn't exist. Let's start with Two Doors. To understand Ozploitation, you have to understand that two completely different things had to happen first. Two doors had to open, and they opened for reasons that had nothing to do with horror at all. Door number one is about permission. For most of Australian history, you couldn't really put adult content on a cinema screen. Censorship wasn't loud, it was quiet. The films just didn't get made or didn't get shown, and nobody made a fuss because nobody knew what they were missing. Australia in the 1960s was, cinematically, a very polite place. The kind of place that would let you make a film about a man and his dog, provided the dog kept his shirt on. Then, on the 15th of November 1971, a customs minister with the most fabulous name Don Chip introduced a new rating system, and tucked inside it was a brand new category, the R certificate. Restricted, adults only. And for the first time, legally, an Australian film could show you sex, nudity, and graphic violence, provided you were a grown-up about it. Which, as we will see, was an enormous and possibly fatal assumption to make about the Australian film industry. Just think for a moment about what that does. Overnight, a whole category of film became legal that simply hadn't been allowed to exist. The filmmakers got the permission slip before they got anything else. Before the money, before the talent, before, in many cases, the stories. They had the license to show you absolutely anything, and not yet the faintest idea what. And they moved fast. Within 2 years, there was a film called Alvin Purple, a sex comedy about a man irresistible to women, made specifically to cash in on the new rating. And it becomes one of the most commercially successful Australian films of the entire decade. So the first thing Australia did, with its hard-won artistic freedom, its great liberation from the censor, was to make a feature film about a bloke who can't stop having sex. And while the critics looked away, these films were quietly training a generation. Jackie Weaver appeared in the Alvin Purple film, a woman who would go on to earn 2 Academy nominations for Animal Kingdom and Silver Linings Playbook. Brian Brown cut his teeth in this same circuit. And Mel Gibson, before Braveheart and the slow and comprehensive unravelling, had his film breakthrough in a little movie called Mad Max. Technically, a product of the exact same funding logic. Maximum violence, minimum prestige, a car chase that doubles as an export pitch. An entire generation of talent that would go on to anchor international productions, passed first through the same machine that, a few years later, would produce the single most ambitious feat of oversized porcine engineering in the Southern Hemisphere. So that's door 1, permission. Hold it open, and now here's where it gets interesting, because door 2 is about money, and it opens twice. The respectable door. In 1970, the Prime Minister John Gordon sets up the first government body to fund Australian films. A few years later, in 1975, the Whitlam government upgrades it to something bigger and better funded, called the Australian Film Commission. And it matters enormously because Australia, as a nation, just decided to pay for its own cinema. After decades of barely making films at all, the government is writing cheques. But, and this is the crucial bit, the Film Commission had taste. Excellent taste. Almost a problem how much taste it had. It liked films that made the country look good, handsome, literary. Period film. Things based on respected novels set in beautiful landscapes full of bonnets and longing and meaningful silences where someone stares at a hill. This is the era of Picnic at Hanging Rock, and later, My Brilliant Career and Gallipoli. Gorgeous films, genuinely prestige films. Exactly the kind of cinema Australia wanted to show the world at its dinner party, ideally just before serving something with quince in it. This is the door marked, in big polished brass letters, Australian cinema. And almost no horror came through it. You see, the Film Commission was curating the good silver, and it was not, under any circumstances, going to fund a robot pig. And frankly, if you'd pitched it one, it would have quietly shown you the door. The other door. And then, in 1981, the government opens the second door money. And this one changes everything, because this door is a tax rule. And it has a deeply, almost heroically un-Hollywood, unglamorous name. It's called Division 10BA. And I need you to stay with me here for about 90 seconds because this is the single most important, boring thing in the entire history of Australian horror. And I promise to get back to us killing as quickly as I can. So here's how it worked. If you, a wealthy Australian, put money into an Australian film, the government would let you deduct 150% of it off your tax. Not 100, 150. So if you put in $1, you wrote off $1.50. And then if that weren't generous enough, if the film actually made money and paid you back, you only had to pay tax on half of it. It was the sort of deal that if a man offered it to you in a pub, you would assume he was about to steal your kidney. Sit with that for just a moment because it is genuinely deranged. A tax system was now offering ordinary rich people a deal where the film could be a complete disaster, an absolute dog, and you would still come out ahead. The downside was it was capped by the taxman. The worse the film in a sense, the better the investment. Which is not a sentence you want to hear anywhere near the founding document of a national cinema. And yet, here we are. And I want to be fair to it, because it sounds like pure cynicism, and it wasn't entirely. The idea behind 10BA was actually quite noble on paper. Because the government looked at prestige films and all of these lovely checks it had been writing through the 70s and thought, we can't fund this forever. We need private money to take over. We need a film industry that stands on its own. So, we'll bribe the rich to invest just for a few years until the whole thing becomes self-sustaining and we can step back. That was the dream. Hold on to it because we're going to watch it die at the end. And here's what that did. Here's the number that tells you the whole story. In the 1970s, the government funded most Australian films. Public money, prestige films, the good silver. By the financial year 1981 to 82, barely months after this tax rule came in, private investors were funding 95% of them. 95% in about a year. The entire funding base of the Australian National Cinema flipped almost overnight from the government to a heaving crowd of dentists and lawyers and accountants who had, by and large, never knowingly watched a horror film in their lives and were now its single most important patrons. The Medici of Melbourne, if you were. If the Medici had been primarily motivated by their April tax return, the money didn't trickle in. It detonated. And now think about what kind of film that money wanted to make. Because this is the engine of the whole idea, the thing that explains everything else. Under the Film Commission, a committee with exquisite taste chose the films. Under 10BA, the films got chosen by a prospectus, a document, a pitch sold to an investor whose actual artistic goal, deep in his heart, was a tax deduction. And, if at all possible, a sale to America so he could tell his accountant it was a real business. So what sells to someone like that? Definitely not subtlety. Definitely not a tasteful meditation on Federation-era womanhood. What you need is a hook, one line, a concept so clean you can sell it across a table to someone who is thinking mostly about its depreciation. You're thinking, a giant pig, a man who kills with his mind, and a town that murders travellers for their cars. You don't need to read the script, and you barely need a script. You need a sentence and a poster, and the poster is doing most of the work. So, picture yourself as a producer in 1981. You've got permission, courtesy of the R certificate, and you have got an avalanche of other people's money, courtesy of 10BA, and a nation of dentists. And you've got an American drive-in market positively starving for exactly the kind of nasty, violent, gleeful filth that Australia has been always far too well-mannered to ever make at home. You have, in short, every ingredient: the license, the cash, the customer. So what do you build with all of that? Well, you don't build Picnic at Hanging Rock. You build a monster. So let's look at what actually came out of that gap. And I'm not going to give you in-depth plot summaries because that's where film podcasts go to die. I'm going to give you 5 films, and each one shows you something different about how this strange machine actually worked. Patrick, 1978. Patrick is about a young man in a coma. He doesn't move, he doesn't speak, he just lies in a hospital bed with his eyes open, staring and occasionally spitting, which we'll let pass. Oh, and he kills people with his mind. That's it. That's the entire film. A man does nothing, very intensely for 90 minutes, and it's genuinely unnerving. And notice how perfect that is as a pitch. You have a comatose man who murders by telekinesis. You can sell that in one breath, in any language, and on any poster, in any country on earth, possibly to people who don't speak. It is, in the most literal sense, high concept. It fits on the prospectus with room to spare. Patrick was made for about $400,000, half public money, half private, and at home in Australia, it more or less flopped. Because Australians, confronted with a homegrown horror masterpiece, looked at it and went, no thank you, went to see something American instead. But abroad, it sold to more than 30 countries. In America, they actually redubbed the whole thing, ripped out the Australian voices, and put American ones in, because heaven forbid an audience in Ohio would be exposed to a vowel sound from Melbourne. It won a major genre prize in France, where they will, to be fair, give a prize to almost anything. But still, France, for a film about a man in a coma. And now here's something nobody tells you about Patrick. In 1978, the exact same year, a British film came out with the exact same premise. A man with terrifying telekinetic power causes death and mayhem, and nobody believes him. It was called The Medusa Touch, and it starred Richard Burton, at the time one of the most bankable, most decorated names in world cinema. All-star British cast, and it had a serious budget, with the full weight of a prestige production behind it. Patrick had Robert Thompson a hospital gown and about 400,000 Australian dollars. The Medusa Touch sank. It's a footnote now, curiosity, whilst Patrick is still being discussed, still being watched, still cited as a foundational genre film. Now the reason, you could argue, is that The Medusa Touch was simply riding a wave. Carrie had come out 2 years earlier, and every producer with a checkbook was trying to cash in on the wake. Burton's film was chasing the moment. Patrick was finding the feeling. And in horror, the feeling always outlasts the moment. Burton's film had the star power. The Australian film had the dread. Dread wins. So here we are, right at the start, and you can see the export logic running through the whole show. The film that bombed at home conquered the world. And remember that, because it's the pattern for everything that follows. Oh, and one more thing about Patrick. It was written by a screenwriter named Everett de Roche. Bank that name, you're going to need it later on. Now we come to Long Weekend, 1978. And if you've only heard the Ozploitation story as a freak show, Long Weekend is the film that breaks your assumptions. And a quick note though, if you've been with us from episode 1, you already know this already. It was the centerpiece of our very first episode. So do yourself a favour. You haven't heard it, go back and listen to it. It does deserve the full treatment. But for brevity's sake, here's the short version. A married couple, going through it. They take a camping trip to a remote beach to patch things up, and they are awful. Not to each other, although, yeah, but to the place. They cut down a tree for no reason. They run over a kangaroo, and they don't stop. They leave their rubbish absolutely everywhere, and they spray insecticide at anything that moves. And slowly, very slowly, the landscape starts to respond. Not attack, respond. There's no monster in Long Weekend. There's no villain. The thing hunting this couple is the bush itself, the whole ecosystem, quietly closing in because these two have treated it like a thing instead of a place. The landscape isn't the backdrop. The landscape is the thing doing the killing. Here's what's genuinely remarkable. This came out of the same taxman drive-in machine as the Schlock. The same financing logic that built the robot pig also, somehow, produced this quiet, dread-soaked, genuinely upsetting film about a marriage and a guilty country. It has won multiple awards in Europe, and it's still, decades later, one of the best films Australia has ever made about itself. Thirst, 1979. Thirst is the export instinct with the mask off, and it's my favourite premise of the lot. A secret society of vampires, except these are modern, organised and corporate. They don't lurk in castles. They farm human beings for blood, at scale, like a dairy. There's a facility. These are essentially milking sheds, but for people. Somewhere in this film is a middle manager hitting his quarterly blood targets. And honestly, it's scarier than any amount of facts. It's a great, nasty idea, and it was distributed in America by New Line, a company that would later get fabulously rich off a man with knives for fingers. And you've spotted the pattern by now. Thirst did better overseas than at home. Australia shrugs, the world buys. We were, it turns out, a country running a roaring export trade in nightmares we refused to consume ourselves. Like a brewery full of teetotalers. And behind all of this, you start to see the producers. And one man in particular, Anthony Ginnane. He was turning out these films at almost a production line level. Every one of them aimed squarely at the international market. People called him Australia's Roger Corman, which in this world is a genuine compliment. He understood the one thing the prestige crowd never did. The customer for these films did not live in Australia. The customer lived at an American drive-in in the back of a car and was not, at that precise moment, paying terribly close attention to the second act. Roadgames, 1981. Roadgames is a thriller. A truck driver crossing the Nullarbor Plain becomes convinced that another driver on the highway is a serial killer, and nobody believes him. It's basically Hitchcock's Rear Window in a truck in the desert, and it's terrific. The lead truck driver is Stacy Keach, an American, and this is entirely deliberate. The distributor who put real money in had a condition, a recognisable face above the title. So, you've got an American behind the wheel of an Australian road movie, driving an Australian truck through Australian emptiness. Because investors needed something they could put on a poster in Ohio without explaining the vowels. And then there's the hitchhiker, a mysterious young woman he keeps encountering on the highway. She comes, she goes, and you're never quite sure what she knows. She is the film's great floating question mark, and the camera is extremely interested in her. Now, hold her there for a moment. The director, Richard Franklin, had trained at film school in America at USC, where he sat in the same lecture theatres as George Lucas, Robert Zemeckis, and a young man named John Carpenter. By 1980, Carpenter had made Halloween and had turned a then-known actress into the most famous scream queen on earth. The actress was Jamie Lee Curtis. And Franklin, his old film school mate, simply rang him up and called in a favour, which is how the reigning queen of American horror, fresh off the most successful slasher film ever made, ended up standing on the side of the Nullarbor in an Australian truck film, paid for by a tax dodge. The entire global film industry, you see, it turns out runs on exactly the same principle as everything else in life. Who you sat next to at uni. And that really is the whole era in a nutshell. You have an Australian film, shot in the most Australian place imaginable, that had to put on an American face, call in an American favour, and hope that no one in Ohio listened too closely to the accents. The money came from a tax break, but all the strings were connected to Hollywood. Razorback, 1984. And so we come back to the pig. Now you know why someone spent $250,000 on a robot boar. Because the money was there, sloshing around, looking for a monster to spend itself on. And a giant killer pig terrorizing the outback is exactly the kind of one-line hook that sells to an investor and sells to America. The pig isn't a creative decision. The pig is a financial instrument with tusks. But, as in all great movies, there's a twist, and this one's a beauty. Because the man they hired to direct Razorback was named Russell Mulcahy, and it was his very first feature film. Before this, Mulcahy made music videos, and not just any music videos. He directed Video Killed the Radio Star by the Buggles, which holds the small but genuinely immortal place in history as the first music video ever played on MTV. That clip launched an entire channel. So let that settle for a moment. The man who fired the starting gun on MTV, the visual genius who ushered in the entire music video age, chose as his debut feature film a film about a giant pig built around a robot that wouldn't switch on. And because he can't show you a giant pig, he falls back on everything he learned making pop videos. The fog, the light, the impossible speed. He shoots the Australian outback like a 4-minute Duran Duran clip, which, as it happens, he also directed. So he knew exactly what he was doing. And it works. The film's whole reputation today rests on how staggeringly good it looks. 2 years later, Mulcahy went to Hollywood and made Highlander, which became a cult phenomenon and spawned roughly 9 sequels, each one explaining at length that there can be only one, despite the films themselves suggesting otherwise at considerable expense. A broken robot pig in the Australian outback was his audition tape for immortal Scottish swordsman. There is no straight line in this industry. There is only the pig, and occasionally Sean Connery playing a Spaniard. Razorback was also written by Everett DeRoche. Patrick, Long Weekend, Roadgames and Razorback. 4 of the films we have just walked through, and 4 of the most defining horror films of this entire era. The telekinetic killer, the vengeful landscape, the desert thriller, and the giant pig. Completely different films, and every single one of them was written by the same man. A quiet, transplanted American who moved to Melbourne in his early 20s and learned his trade the hard way, grinding out episodes of Australian cop shows, Homicide, Division 4, the day-to-day of television, week after week, until he could build a story in his sleep. And then he took that factory discipline and pointed it at horror, and quietly became the single most important voice in the genre this country has ever produced. Everett DeRoche. You have almost certainly never heard his name. There is no statue, and there is barely a usable photograph. I bet you could walk into any pub in this country and ask who wrote the 4 greatest Australian horror films, and not one single person would get it. And the man himself would probably have preferred it that way. He wrote the nightmares of an entire nation, 4 of which you've just sat through tonight. And you didn't even clock they came from the same hand until I stood here and I told you. That is a special, almost heroic level of invisible. The most important horror writer in Australian history, and he managed to vanish completely behind his own work. But that genuinely, properly, is a story for a next time. I'm not doing it now. Stop looking at it. So that's the how. It's the R certificate, the tax break, the export market, and the monsters. But here's where it gets to the thing that I actually want to talk about. Because for all the fun, for all the robot pigs and the favours called in from John Carpenter, Australia spent decades pretending none of these films existed. And the reason why is one of the most interesting things of this whole story. The cringe. There's a phrase in Australian culture, and it was coined back in 1950 by a critic named A. Phillips. And sadly, it's stuck around because it's painfully accurate. The phrase is cultural cringe. Cultural cringe is the deep, reflexive Australian assumption that anything made here must be worse than the version made overseas, that the local thing is automatically a bit embarrassing, a bit second-rate, next to the imported British or American article. It's the small, treacherous voice in the back of the nation's skull that says, "Yeah, this is good." But what would a cultivated Englishman make of it? Phillips wrote that in 1950, and I would love to tell you that we've grown out of it. But, and again, I've watched an entire room of Australians apologise for a meat pie, so... And sadly, the Ozploitation films got hit with a double whammy. Once for being Australian, and then again for being horror, for being low, for being vulgar drive-in trash rather than the proper cinema, with a message and a producer who'd actually read Patrick White. So when the official histories of Australian film came to be written, these films were quietly left out. Not attacked. Worse than attacked. They were ignored. They weren't even the cinema Australia wanted to show the world. They were that relative that you sit at the end of the family table and pray they don't start being racist or sexist. They ultimately got cropped out of the family album altogether, and in their place, in the album, went the tasteful ones. The Bonnets, the beautiful, respectable, government-funded prestige films. There's even a name critics gave them, the AFC genre, the house style of the Film Commission. Handsome, literary, safe. Those were allowed to be the story of Australian cinema. The horror was the bit everyone agreed not to mention. And the people who made these films? Well, some of them rode the whole era straight into the big time. George Miller made a little film called Mad Max for about $400,000 on roads he simply closed without telling anyone, and then swept up his own wreckage off the highway afterwards. Like teenage kids cleaning the house after a party before mum and dad get home. And it went on to hold the world record for the most profitable film ever made by return on budget. And that was a record it held until the Blair Witch Project in 1999. The entire Mad Max universe, every desert, every war rig, every Charlize Theron, all of it grew out of one guerrilla shoot with no permits and a bloke with a dustpan. And here's one that I love. There was a young camera operator working on some of these films in the 70s. He worked on Picnic at Hanging Rock as the guy physically running the camera, not even the head of department, just a guy in the camera crew on a low-budget Australian film nobody was watching. His name was John Searle. John Searle went on to earn 5 Academy Award nominations and 6 BAFTA nominations, and win both for The English Patient in 1996. The camera operator from the Hanging Rock crew has an Oscar and a BAFTA on his shelf. The talent that this scrappy, tax-funded, looked-down-upon era was quietly training up went on to win the highest honours in the world cinema. They just had to leave the country to get the credit for it. But not everyone escaped. For every Miller, there's a Richard Franklin, the man who made Patrick and Roadgames, who trained alongside Lucas and Carpenter, who actually befriended Hitchcock, who got to Hollywood and directed Psycho 2, and then somehow never got the third act his talent deserved, and came home, taught film and died in 2007. Or Colin Eggleston, who made Long Weekend, one of Australia's greatest films, and never came close to matching it again. And the one who outlasted them all wasn't even a director. It was Anthony Ginane, the producer, the man who understood the tax code. Ginane just kept going. No dramatic fall from grace, no scandal, and no cautionary tale. He carried on producing through the 90s and into the 2000s, eventually serving as the head of the Screen Producers Association of Australia from 2008 to 2011. Never a prestige player chasing awards. Never interesting to the people writing the official histories. A deal maker who wanted bums on seats, who understood earlier than almost anyone that the customer for Australian horror did not live in Australia, and who kept that engine running long after everyone else had walked away from the pumps. The directors burnt out and the money man survived, which tells you something about what this era actually rewarded. And then there are the stuntmen. Because none of these films had the budget for safety, and certainly not for permits. So the danger you're watching on screen is, very often, completely and alarmingly real. The patron saint of those whole enterprises was a man named Grant Page, ex-commando. Hundreds of stunts across decades, and a man for whom the phrase risk assessment would have been some sort of light comedy. And for one of these films, he set himself on fire and jumped backwards off a cliff, roughly 25 meters. On fire. Backwards. For a scene. Not the climax. A scene. On another shoot, he broke his leg in a car crash, and then simply went back and finished his stunts on it, including jumping a car through a caravan on the broken leg, because the alternative was a delay. And there's footage of him, you can find it. He's explaining perfectly cheerfully, with the calm of a man describing his commute, that they just do these fast highway chases with no traffic control, no police permission, nothing. They just shut the roads themselves and rolled the camera. Health and safety in Australia of 1976 was a suggestion that you were free to ignore, and Grant Page ignored it harder than anyone alive. And here's the part that stops you cold. Grant Page died in 2024 at 85 in a car. He hit a tree. After a lifetime of throwing himself off cliffs and through windscreens and out of helicopters, deliberately, for money, the thing that got him in the end was the drive home. There's no joke in that one. I've looked. It's just one of those endings that's almost too neat for the man who spent his whole life cheating exactly the ending. Most nations' cinemas are shaped by what a culture wants to say about itself. France makes French films because French has things they want to express. But Ozploitation wasn't shaped by what Australia wanted to say. It was shaped by what a tax form would reward. When a film exists first and foremost as a tax deduction, its job isn't to be good. Its job is to be financeable and saleable and fit on a prospectus. High concept hook, exportable violence, no time wasted on prestige. You'd think that that would produce nothing but garbage. And to be fair, a lot of it was garbage, let's be honest. But here's the miracle. A handful of real filmmakers and one extraordinary screenwriter smuggled genuine craft and genuine fear through a system that was built to reward neither. The grief in The Long Weekend, the dread in Patrick, the eye in Razorback. None of that was required. None of that helped sell the tax units. It got in anyway, through the cracks. And that's the thing I find almost moving about this whole stupid, brilliant time. Australia's real nightmares, the guilt about the land, the fear of the empty interior, the things the polite prestige films were too tasteful to touch, didn't surface where the culture invited them. They surfaced where the money accidentally left the door open. The horror got in through a gap in the tax code. So, The Pig. $250,000 of robot boar that barely worked in a film hardly anyone in Australia bothered to see. Built because for a few short years, a tax loophole made it briefly, genuinely make sense to spend serious money building monsters. And here's the thing about that pig. It's still here. People still watch Razorback. They still watch Patrick, The Long Weekend, and they're still genuinely rattled by them, decades after every single person involved has forgotten which tax bracket paid for them. The films outlived the loophole. The monsters outlived the accountants. And remember that noble dream behind the tax break? The plan that private money would take over a few years and then the Australian film industry would stand on its own 2 feet forever? Well, it never happened. The boom ended in tax scandals and rich people who stopped caring whether films were even any good because the loss was the point. The government panicked, wound the whole thing back, and replaced it in 1988 with a body called the Film Finance Corporation, which then spent the next 20 years investing $1.33 billion in getting back about $270 million. That's a return of minus 80%. The dream of a self-sustaining Australian cinema didn't just fail, it failed by 80 cents in every dollar. That party was never going to pay for itself. It was always the taxpayer's tab. The respectable cinema, the bonnets and the beautiful landscapes, told Australia the story it wanted to hear about itself. And the horror, the trash, the stuff in the back room, told it the story it didn't. And then Australia spent 30 years insisting the back room didn't exist. Until an American turned up. Quentin Tarantino. Of all the people on earth, it had to be. Stood up, vibrating with enthusiasm as is his way, and told Australia that the embarrassing films it had shoved in the back of the cupboard were actually the good ones. That the trash was treasure, and that the pig was art. And Australia believed him. Instantly, completely. Because of course it did. It needed an American with a microphone to give it permission to enjoy its own nightmares. We could not, under any circumstances, have arrived at that conclusion ourselves, which is, when you really sit with it, the single most Australian thing in this entire story. And we've just spent 40 minutes on a story that includes a robot pig. Every film I've inflicted on you today, Patrick, Long Weekend, Thirst, Roadgames, and yes, of course, the pig, is sitting over in the video vault at strangecountry.com.au. Go meet the boar. Can't hurt you. I never really could. And next time, we leave the continent entirely. Because before Peter Jackson built his gore-drenched empire in a Wellington garage, New Zealand horror had a whole other story going on. Darker, stranger, and almost completely forgotten. A life before Jackson. I'll see you there. I'm Matt Dolby. This has been Strange Country. Mind the wildlife.